Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Hello, this is the Professor Podcast. I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire. And this week we are talking about exams. But before we get to that, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was good. I had something to update on last week. So last week we talked about getting tenure and trying to address some rumors for tenure. And so this week I decided to accept that challenge.
Awesome.
And I had one rumor that I had heard and I tried to address it and I got 3 different answers. So
still a rumor.
Still a rumor. Still unsubstantiated rumor.
Is that where it's going to stay, or do you have another
I don't
plan?
know.
Or?
So I guess the rumor... the rumor I was addressing was if you are paid for work by a grant, then you cannot claim it as service.
Right.
And so I asked one person who said that is always true. You cannot get paid for it. Another person said that's never true. And then a third person said... you have to ask your committee and be specific.
Gosh.
So
we have no idea.
We have no idea, basically.
Well, at least it's not obviously, I guess what I mean is I think that should count as service, and at least we haven't ruled that possibility out yet.
Exactly. And I think it really validates what you said last week about the rumor mill, because it is a real thing and it is genuinely hard to navigate.
Yeah.
So just validating your thing that you're working on is valid and confusing. So yes, that was my thing. How about you? How was your week?
My week was good. I have been trying to get out from under this pile of recommendation letter requests that I'm currently under. And I feel like I did a pretty good job of getting out of the pile, but the pile is definitely still there. So, yeah, it's one of those things where as soon as I have a letter written, I'm super into sending it off and I'm super fast, But when it's not, when I don't even have a draft yet, then like today I just wrote and submitted one the day it was due and felt kind of bad for being, I always appreciated when I was a student, the faculty members that would submit it really fast and I could just not worry about them. And I always want to be that person, but it can be. I don't know. I understand why you submit them late now. And
I want to put in a special request for us to have an episode only about this because I am struggling and I don't even think I would have something that works. I think I would just have all problems, but it's tough to navigate.
Yeah.
And it's, Yeah. If I could implore the world at large, it would be that REUs and grad schools would have the same procedure for uploading a letter, but I don't think I have that power to make that happen, but that would be
convenient. Yeah. That's interesting. I don't really mind. Once I have the letter written,
it's just
totally into it. Yeah. It's just a quick little job, but I can see, it is a job. It'd be better if it wasn't a job.
I think my issue is like anxiety that I'm going to miss one.
Right.
And then guilt. Like, what would you do if you were there? Anyway.
Yeah.
I feel like we're going into
another
episode.
We'll have a whole episode on that later. So, but exams is what we're talking about right now. So, exam season coming up sometime soon. So would you want to ask what I go for? What do you have to say about exams?
What I feel good about with exams is that a few years ago, I had my mind completely blown at a workshop called A Scala. And it was talking about exams really not being a tool of punishment, but rather a tool of learning. And it really turned my entire concept of exams upside down. And I think I hadn't really recognized the fact that we, in an ideal world, are just giving exams because we want them to learn that material.
Right.
And if they didn't have an exam, they might never learn that material. And I used to, when I started teaching, have a kind of meaner attitude and trying to be like, I'm going to ask this one thing that's this obscure thing I said one time and the really good students will know this. And just hearing this and kind of thinking about it more and realizing there isn't any reason to not tell them exactly what's going to be on the exam and be really explicit about it and make it's not about tricking students, because if everyone in the class got an A on the exam, how wonderful. Then they all know the stuff. And so, yeah, that was a big game changer for me. And so it's definitely changed how I approach exams. And now I have been giving very detailed instructions about what will be on the exam.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I've done that a colleague here does is they do it a little differently, but they do group exams. And so what I do is I give them back the test, and then the next class period, I think the class period where I give it back, they get in groups and they can work through another, like a blank version of the test with slightly different numbers to make up points, like get some correction credit. And it really works because, for one thing, they don't complain about their score as much, because I think when they work through the problems, they realize, oh yeah, that was wrong. You know what I mean? And they kind of, and then the other thing is they really learn it. And I have no data to support this, but I often on the final put a midterm question on there to kind of just check if they went back to, and since I've started doing these correction exam days, those questions have gotten way better. Like they really learn it when they go through it.
Great.
So that, and it's just sort of, and it sometimes those really depressing conversations you have after a test, it's slightly mitigated because they're like, okay, they got a few points back, they feel a bit better. But it doesn't, I was really worried when I did it, it would inflate everybody's grade, but it doesn't really end up doing that. And yeah, it kind of feels like they really get that material way better.
Awesome.
So I'm into it.
So the day that you hand back the tests,
Mm-hmm.
Do they have a minute to look through them, or do they immediately get in their groups? What happens there?
So last year I had a weird teaching schedule where I would have a lecture, they had a lunch break, and then it would be lab. And so I would let them use the lab period to redo the tests. Mm-hmm. So you're right. Like they definitely get a chance to look through it and like go through the corrections and see where they went wrong. And then kind of, they can't have that test with them when they redo it. So there needs to be discussion between them.
And so then they're in groups, and do they have the same groups throughout the semester, or how do you do that?
That I have not, and that should be a whole other episode. I'm just suggesting all these episodes, but group dynamics is tough.
Groups, we should definitely have a group episode.
And the last couple of times it hasn't really been an issue. They all just kind of work together. Like they were just fall back. They usually just fell into their lab groups.
Oh,
that they were happy
so you
with.
just let them. You weren't explicit about who they had to be with.
No, and I think I should be. Like I think I should figure that out. Or like if something came up,
right,
where people were just,
didn't like their group for some reason.
Yeah. And I definitely did have one situation where it was two guys and a girl, and I knew she had gotten the highest score, and they just would not listen to anything. And eventually I just had to go over and be like, she's right, you're wrong, move it along. And like kind of, because they just were arguing, but not listening to her. But I knew she was right.
I heard an interesting technique for that. I'm trying to remember exactly how it worked, but it was something like, it was a group exam. I think in this particular case, it was the entire class was one group.
Oh, wow.
And it counted as part of the exam score. And it was a smaller class. I don't know, 12 or something. But the idea was you could disagree with the class if you wanted to. So maybe I'm combining two things. But there was definitely an idea where you could have a dissenting opinion from the group, and that was fine. And sometimes the dissenter was correct. And then in the scenario where it was the whole class did have to come to an agreement on the problem. And often it would happen that one dissenter would be like, no, guys, I don't think that's right. And pull the whole class around to agreement on, a particular aspect of the problem. So anyway.
Have you seen that movie 12 Angry Men?
No.
Okay. It was like, but it's like someone on the jury, and slowly they'd like turn the jury around to like real, anyway, sorry. But I was like, whoa, that could be happening in the classroom. But it's cool. I think like even just someone articulating to someone else, I think this is 5 because is huge.
Totally.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating.
Yeah. So I like it. And I think there's a few things that are pretty luxurious. So that like one thing is, I've always been teaching the lecture and the lab together. So I can just be like, oh, today in lab, we're going to do this instead. So that's definitely a luxury that isn't always the case. So that definitely has helped.
Do you find it do you want the whole 3 hours of lab period for this exam? group activity?
Now that sometimes it ends up being activity instead, and we have these activity sections that are 2 hours.
Oh, 2 hours. Okay.
And so, I think it just depends.
Okay. Because I was just thinking, could I fit that into a class that was 50 minutes or something, you know?
Oh, I bet you could. And they finish really quick.
Oh, okay.
They finish way quicker than they did the exam.
I see.
So that's
interesting. That's really interesting.
But I guess, and that's the thing where like, I think getting the idea that the exam should really help them learn the material, not just they have to prove they know something.
Right.
Blew my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny. I remember talking to a colleague a long time ago who said that they gave their class a practice test and it was the same as the actual test and it doesn't change anything. And it's weird how when you give all the information about the test, I got anxious the first time I did it that suddenly everyone was going to, like, it would inflate everybody's grade. And it really doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
I think the people who are strong, like hard workers, will be really prepared.
Mm-hmm.
But the people who don't really do anything still won't do anything. You know what I mean? And so
if they're struggling to do the practice, then they're still going to struggle at the exam. Potentially. Some of them will, at least.
But I think it definitely eases some anxiety, especially for those students who... You know, because you have those students who are just so diligent and hardworking and it doesn't always reflect in their exam scores.
Right,
and
sure.
Yeah, this seems to kind of, I don't know if it like totally changes their score, but it certainly gives them concrete things to work on. And
I love that it encourages, and in fact, more than encourages them to go through the exam again and really think about what they knew and didn't know that. I mean, that's the goal, is for them to know how to do this stuff. So.
Right. And again, this is so lame, but I really feel like in the first couple of years, it was not clear to me that was the goal. It was more like you prove that you know it. And then now I'm like, oh yeah, it is supposed to be. Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. So and I love the focus that you're having of exactly what is my goal of this aspect of the class. That's really
right.
Cool.
And sometimes, I'm just side going here as well, but I'm in another course that I did, and someone pointed out like sometimes physics questions are really wordy, and especially if you're in a school where everybody's first language is not necessarily English. Right. Like, are you testing reading comprehension? Like, what is the thing you're actually testing? And to be mindful of that. And I don't think I'm really there with that.
Yeah. But that makes sense.
Yeah. So tell me, what about you?
Well, I realized you were gesturing at me earlier because I had forgotten the quote. So the quote.
Oh my God. Sorry.
Oh, you weren't. I thought that was what you were saying. But anyway, the quote is, it's another Harry Potter one.
Always a winner.
And the quote is, "Never trust anything that can think for itself if you can't see where it keeps its brain." And I'm kind of cheating here because that's Arthur Weasley, who's not one of the many professors.
But such a mentor.
Exactly. So, and I read that, thinking about quotes for this podcast, and it made me think of calculators and how often it is that I'm grading a question and everything's perfect until the final calculation where they plugged it into the calculator and then it's some bananas answer. And don't trust your calculators.
No, I know. And then that's why, like, you always try and, like, you must show your work. Because if it's clearly just a calculator
then
error,
minus
then
one instead of 10. But,
right, but if they don't show any work and then you just get this scrambled number, like, what can you do?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my positive exam thing, what I've been doing for this one class that I teach every fall, so I've taught it 4 times, and every year I've been putting up, available for the students, all the exams from my previous years teaching it, including full written out answer keys.
Wow.
And yeah, my goal is that they know exactly that, types of questions I'm going to ask. They can practice them, 4 whole exams at this point. Of course, it was fewer before, is a lot of practice problems in the exact format that I usually ask them. So, yeah, my hope is that they're not going to be surprised when they get to the exam that I put up.
That's huge. And that's, like, really equitable for students.
I hope so.
I think so, because I think something that students, especially if they don't have a lot of, like, cultural experience about college, like just a lot of
good point.
friends or not, like having that concrete, like, this is what this test is going to look like.
Right.
And so many of them, before they go in, are just so anxious they don't even
know what's going to be on this test.
Right.
They have no idea, but hopefully they have a better idea. Yeah.
That's
so
huge.
I like doing that. Of course, it does require that I rewrite my tests every year.
Yes,
but that's where my amazing husband comes in again, because he will help me proofread them.
There you go. Amazing husbanding part 2.
Amazing husbanding part 2.
Dude, I have had some intense exam disasters. Like one time, and not one time, 2 times, I have gone into an exam where like I didn't hit 2-sided on the photocopier. And so half of the questions are missing, and oh my God.
So then what'd you do?
One time, it was really like my first semester teaching, and I kind of managed to pull them out of my head and write them on the board.
Wow.
Like I knew what they were.
Great. Good
and
solution.
Then the other time it happened, it was actually here, and it was a longer period. So I was just like, work on what you have.
I'll be right back.
A colleague came and sat in, and I ran up to the photocopier,
Nice.
but
gosh,
yeah, not smooth. But
that reminds me of one of my times when I realized there was a problem midway through the exam. It was a multiple choice question, and I had not given any correct answers. so then I'm like, okay, guys, question 8, change D to, will not change the potential. And then obviously that's the right answer. So that was a funny one.
Oh dear. That's kind of awesome.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
but it's the kind of thing, as an undergrad, when there was mistakes, I was like, how could this possibly happen? And then now I'm like, oh yeah, that's all too easy.
Yeah.
Because when you've just looked at something so many times, you don't see.
Totally.
Yeah. That is very cool though. And it kind of brings me to what I'm...
Oh, great. What's that?
Well, so I'm really lazy. I'm a lazy person, and I don't have multiple versions of exams. And so what you're doing is the goal. Like that's what you should do, is give them old exams to practice. But as a lazy person, or like, I don't know, I really like some, and okay, so there's 2 factors. One, it would be better for them to give them old exams. And the other one is, now I definitely know last semester I gave a very similar midterm.
Right.
And I know that a student knew someone from a previous class, and they did extraordinarily well on this test.
See.
So I know they had, you know what I mean? And
right.
I could not prove it. And
of course. Yeah.
But so there is, like, they get out in the world, your exams. So I need to rally my lazy self to write new and exciting questions.
Well, one of the things that I learned from someone in grad school was that laziness is the mother of all invention, he would always say. So I feel confident that you'll come up with a good invention that does not involve rewriting your exams every...
So that is really cool. Yeah. I wonder how creative I will get to not have to
exactly come up with some brilliant solution. Yeah.
And then the other thing I kind of had about exams was, the class I'm doing right now is the first physics class.
Okay.
And I keep telling the students, this is really a time like you grow as a student, and you might be having a rocky start in the beginning, but you're going to get into your stride and it will all be fine by the end.
Nice.
And I'm wondering, should I change my grade weighting to reflect that? Like, should the first exam be worth less? Because I keep telling them this is a growth thing, and you're gonna... So I don't know. Well,
that's interesting. I tell my students a similar thing, but the way I enact it is I say, if your exam score goes up throughout the semester, then I will weight the later exams heavier than the earlier exams.
Oh, I like that.
So I don't actually change anything just in my normal structure of grading. But if I see that they've gone up significantly throughout the semester, then I'll say, okay, they demonstrated that they figured out.
They got into it.
Yeah, they got into it. And they
I like
out
that
stuff.
a lot.
So
that is awesome.
And it is a quick check, just when I'm looking at the final grades, you just look at however many exams there are and see if there's any
standout.
Something stands out.
Well, because it's such a bummer if you have, like, you did kind of crappy in the first midterm and it's going to, like, bring down your whole grade.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so what about you? What are you working on?
So this is interesting because my thing I'm working on is very much like your thing that's going well. Which is that I really want to do better about providing some encouragement for the students to go over their exams after they get them back and learn from them. And I've heard about people doing things similar to what you've described. I haven't heard it quite that way, but like, doing some recovering of points by going over the problems you missed thing afterward. And I always worry about inflating grades because I really do care that they're able to do the problems by themselves and in a timely fashion. You know, I do think time is always a factor in my exams, and I want it to be that way because, you know, if you know it better, you can probably do it faster. So I don't want to lose that, but I do want to give some encouragement somehow to go back over. So, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So one thing that I just realized I forgot to mention.
Okay.
Because the group exams weren't always going that well for me.
Okay.
And people would hand in trash, basically, and stuff. And it was ridiculous. So I started saying this year, I will only regrade this if you get it 100% right.
Interesting. So be really fast to grade.
Yes. And then I say, like, I'm here and I will help you with any of these problems.
Okay.
So, like, just there's no reason you shouldn't get 100%, but sometimes people would like race through it and make the exact same mistakes. And so that kind of put a bit more
interesting
into the other thing too that I try and do is say, like, one of these problems will come back to haunt you in the final. And
nice.
So, you know,
That's
this
good.
would be a good time to get them to go over them, but I don't know.
So wait, first of all, how much do you help them when you're going around and they're asking
I
questions?
help them like as much anything at all.
Okay.
So it usually they have to have discussed it, like they're still discussing it, and it's not just like I don't know.
Right.
So it's just like they're like, is this right? And you're like, oh well, maybe you want to think about it like that.
Okay.
Algebra didn't go quite right, and then they do it again.
Okay, that makes sense.
But then they check it to see if it's right, and then I say, yeah, that was right.
So you'll sign off. That's correct. Okay.
And so it's not as scary as I make it sound, but I do say, like, I'm not going to change your grade unless this is 100%.
And how much do you change their grade?
I do this thing, and I don't think I understand the math, which is sort of lame to admit, but I do like a thing where their previous grade is now 90% of their grade. And the new one is 10%.
I see.
And the thing that happens with that is that when they have a higher score, it's only going to change their grade by like 0.02% or something. But if they have a lower score, it could change it by like the most it's ever changed it by is 3%.
3?
Yeah. And so often those students are ones who had 53% and now they have 56%. Like, it's not a huge difference.
Interesting.
But I don't know why but they're like, I'm going to fight for those points.
Totally.
I mean, it could make a big difference in the end.
Yeah. That's interesting. I haven't heard that. That's a great idea. I like that. Seems like a level that I'd be comfortable. You know, I don't want to give them 10 more points or something. That's totally
no, yeah. And different. I think that would be, and it would be like, I want to give students an opportunity to learn it better, but you can't completely negate what the people who did really well.
Some people really learned it, and you can't
and so
not credit them for that.
Right. And so I think a lot of those people, if they do really well, they just don't stay for the group test.
Oh,
so
that's an option. They can just decide not to.
Yeah. And so they just are like, no, thank you.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'll just leave with my 97 or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah.
Interesting.
But I wonder too, if you don't want to give up the period of time in class, but just saying explicitly, or do you do quizzes?
I've been thinking about it, but so far I haven't in the class I'm thinking of.
But I wonder, could you say, like, next week's quiz is going to be one of the questions off the test, and so please come to here's my office hours, and make sure you come to those, and make sure you know what's.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
One thing I have done that I'm, moderately satisfied with is say, this is the question that most people missed. Here's a new version of that question.
Oh, nice.
You can complete it to get some percentage of however many points you lost back.
Dude, I like that.
Which works pretty well. But then I would prefer if it encompassed the whole exam, because sometimes people are like, I got that one right, but I got this one wrong.
Right.
And I whatever you're needing to study would be the thing. I think, I thought we were getting the signal that we were moving through our time.
Oh, yeah. Because we do have a wonderful producer.
We have a wonderful producer, Ralph, who's keeping track.
And sometimes we make up signals and then we forget what the signals are when he does them. Okay.
All right.
Yes.
So we are at time.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And if you want to let us know things that are working for or things you're working on with exams, please email us at
contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'll
Lovely.
also put it in the liner notes.
Awesome. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes.
Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, Ruth.
And Claire.